When people think about Australia, they usually imagine big cities, beaches, kangaroos, and maybe the Sydney Opera House. But today, I want to tell you something that sounds almost impossible. Australia is one of the biggest countries on Earth, yet about 95% of it is empty. Yes, empty. No cities, no towns, no people, just land. Now, pause for a second. How can a modern country with good roads, airports, and technology be mostly empty? That question bothered me too. So let's talk about it, slowly, clearly, and honestly. Australia is the 6th largest country on the world. It is so big that you can fit India almost twice inside Australia. But here is the surprise. Almost 90% of Australians live in just 5 major cities: Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and Adelaide. That means millions of people are crowded near the coast, while the middle of the country stays almost silent. If you look at Australia from above, it looks like a donut. People on the outside, nothing in the middle. So what happened? To understand this, we need to talk about history first. Long before modern Australia existed, this land was home to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. They lived here for over 60,000 years. Think about that. That's older than the pyramids, older than Rome, older than most civilizations we learn about in school. They survived deserts, floods, fires, and heat without modern tools. They understood the land deeply. But everything changed in 1788 when the British arrived. The British came with ships, soldiers, and prisoners. Yes, prisoners. Australia started as a penal colony, a place where Britain sent criminals. Now, here's a very important point. The British believed something called Terra Nullius. It means land belonging to no one. Because Aboriginal people did not fence land or claim ownership the European way, the British decided the land was empty. But of course, it was not empty. People lived here, families lived here, cultures lived here. Then came disease. The British brought illnesses like smallpox, measles, and influenza. Aboriginal people had no immunity. Imagine this. A sickness arrives that your body has never seen before. No medicine, no doctors. In some areas, half the population died within months. That alone changed Australia forever. But it didn't stop there. As British settlements grew, land was taken, fences were built, water sources were blocked. Aboriginal people were pushed away from places they depended on to survive. Conflict followed. This period is now called the Australian Frontier Wars. It was not one war. It was hundreds of small, violent conflicts over land, lasting almost 100 years. By the early 1900s, the Indigenous population dropped by around 90%, from millions to just tens of thousands. That is not just history. That's a tragedy. And when people disappear, so does knowledge of the land. Then came another major factor: government policy. In 1901, Australia introduced the White Australia policy. This policy restricted non-European immigration. It limited who could enter, live, and work in Australia. This slowed population growth dramatically. At the same time, Australia joined World War I and World War II. Large numbers of young men were sent overseas to fight. Many never returned. So again, population growth slowed. Australia became a country with huge land, but very few people. Now, you might think, okay, that explains history, but what about today? Why don't people move inland now? Good question. This is where geography and climate enter the story. And trust me, Australia's geography is not friendly. Australia has 3 main land regions. First, the Western Plateau. This area covers most of the country. It is dry, flat, hot. Basically, desert. In summer, temperatures can go above 45 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to make your car angry. Living there without constant water supply is extremely difficult. Second, the central lowlands. You might think lowlands are good for farming, but here's the problem. The soil contains a lot of salt. When it rains, salt mixes into the water. This creates salty or brackish water, which is bad for crops and drinking. So even when water exists, it's often not usable. Third, the Eastern Highlands. This is the green part of Australia. Mountains, forests, rivers. This is where most cities are. Why? Because mountains help stop clouds and create rain. Simple geography. That's why people live there. Now let's talk about weather. Australia has some of the most extreme weather on Earth. First, droughts. About 70% of Australia receives very little rain. Some areas can go years without proper rainfall. This makes farming risky and expensive. Second, floods. Here's the strange part. Australia is both very dry and very flood-prone. When rain finally comes, it often comes all at once. Rivers overflow, roads disappear. It's like the land says, "Oh, you wanted water? Here, take all of it." Third, cyclones. Northern Australia faces cyclones almost every year. Strong winds, heavy rain, massive damage. Building large cities there becomes very costly. There's also another quiet problem. Distance. Australia is far from other countries. Building roads, railways, hospitals, and schools across the interior costs billions. Governments choose to invest where people already live, near the coast. It's practical, not emotional. So let's pause and summarize. Australia is mostly empty because of a violent colonial history, massive indigenous population loss, disease, wars, restrictive immigration policies, extreme climate, desert geography, lack of fresh water, and high infrastructure costs. That's not one reason, that's many reasons stacked together. Today, Australia has about 26 million people. Indigenous Australians make up about 3 to 4% of the population. Most Australians live within 50 kilometers of the coast. The center of the country remains quiet, wild, and mostly untouched. Some people call it empty, but maybe a better word is unforgiving. And here's a final thought. Australia is not empty because humans failed. It's empty because nature is powerful and history left deep scars. The land doesn't forgive easily, and maybe it doesn't need to.